Lesson C1, Charting and Time Series Fundamentals. Topic 3, Editing and Configuring a Chart. The learning objectives for this topic are to understand the different tools in the chart component. We're going to cover the different axes and setting the scale, chart types, formats of lines, chart layouts, how to drag tags between charts, hiding and showing and reordering tags, how to use the scooter bars and markers, and adding and dragging markers and limits to and from the basket. So here I have an empty chart component, and we're going to go through each of the steps using this. So we've seen in a previous lesson how to add tags to the chart. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add one of my tags to the basket so we have a trend. Here we are, we've got a series up, and now I can start to play around with it. So the first thing I can do is change the scale on the axes. It's auto-scaled. It's used the Eigen Ingenuity auto-scaling algorithm to make sure that all of the points are visible and it looks nice within the frame. So there's a bit of margin top to bottom. In this case, it hasn't set the 0 as the minimum, but we might want to do that. So I have two ways of setting the axes. One is I can unlock the chart, and I can either use my mouse scroller, or I can click and drag the left axis. The alternative is I can go in and I can edit the axes. So I'm going to say the left axis, actually, I'm happy with the maximum, or maybe let's set it to 60, and I want to set the minimum to 0. And now that's fixed my axes. They're from 0 to 60. If I wanted to move it to a different axis, I can go to the trend options and I can move it. I can move it to the right axis if I wanted. I'm happy keeping it on the left for now. If I wanted to have this as a different chart type, I can go in, and instead of being a line chart, I could change it to an area chart, just like that. I'll stick with it for line for the moment. I can also change the line weights and thicknesses. If I go into the edit or the legend and I go to the color at the left hand side, I can change the series color. I can change it to black, and I can also change its thickness. If I change it to 3, maybe we'll get a much thicker line. I have the option as well of entering a specific hex color if there's an exact color code that I need to match. One of the options we have with Ingenuity is to set custom color palettes if you need them, that can appear here as a default instead of the standard one. Right, so let's leave that color as it is now. If I wanted to change the layout quickly, rather than having to add additional chart components to the page, I have the option here of just changing the layout to be multi-chart. I can just drag a tag from one chart to the other and it will appear. That's pretty easy. So I'm going to revert that because that's not what I want to do at this stage. Now, if I have multiple tags on this chart, I may want to reorder them. So let's add in one of my other tags here. And I can see here that actually this is a completely different scale, so I do need to put this on a different axis. It's also sparse data, and so I want to step it. There we are. Okay. Now, this is pretty hard to see, so I'm going to change I'm going to move it, to the right axis. And I want this axis to be much lower, so I can just see the shape of this data. That's fine, and I'll leave it down there, so it's just visible to me. Now, if I wanted to reorder these series, so for whatever reason I wanted this to be first, if I click and hold on the coloured line and drop it onto the first one, I've actually managed to now put that as the first series. Another thing I can do to make it more readable is if I right click on a tag, I have the option to edit it. And here I have the tag and the name. Now the name of the series defaults to being the tag that you've selected, but I can overwrite that to make it easier to see. So I could say, let's just have the well F valve, and it's an on-off. they're much easier to read already. And this one is quite a long calculation. I'm going to call it an example analog signal. There we are. That's now much easier for a user to read. If I was going to share it with someone, it would be obvious what it is. So now, if something interesting happens, say, I could find a point, and we talked about this before, I can add scooter bars. But let's look at now if I want to drag and drop other things such as limits onto this. From my basket, I can put in and drag out limits and markers. So if I add the limit for this function, you can see here it drops it in and it adds it to the legend. And the limits have a dotted line, a dashed line. You can edit this again by going in here if you like, and rather than dashed you might say dotted. The other thing we can add is markers. Now, if you use the user alerts, an alert, when an alert's generated and you trend it, it will add a marker to a trend of where the limit was breached. So I've got one here, and if I drop it onto my trend, we can see here is an alert that happened when it crossed this low limit here. The markers on a trend or comments, if I was to add another marker, you add a marker by right-clicking and saying add marker. Make this one blue. I can now add this to my basket by right-clicking and going add to basket. So this saves it. So if I wanted to add that to a different trend that I've made, it's there and I can just drag and drop it. Another thing you can do on a trend is easily resize it by grabbing this handle at the bottom, these three lines. If you grab this and move it, it will move the overall size of the frame. And then, as we talked before, you have the option of adding and editing titles and other things to make the chart look just how you want it. Okay, that covers more detailed configuration of charts.